Hi, guys. Welcome to another edition of Fact Checked Faith, where we will be comparing Islam and Christianity and some of the major doctrines that relate to both faiths. Our guest, Laura Zifer Powell, is an expert on this subject, and she has a lot of insights to share with us. So stay tuned. Hello, Laura. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing great. How are you today?
Oh, great. Thank you. So we're talking about some of these major doctrines and information about Islam and Christianity. And we wanted to start off with this topic of origins. So, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I think it's helpful for people to know a little bit of the background of Islam and also Christianity. And so I thought that would be a really good place to start. So, first of all, with the origins of Christianity, the Jewish scriptures start with the beginning of creation
Mm-hmm.
and the first humans, Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
The scriptures trace the lives of God's chosen people through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We read about the Egyptians enslaving the Hebrews, and then God rescuing them through Moses and Aaron. God gives his people a law and a land to call their own. The scriptures continue through the line of King David and then the split of Israel into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. They record increasing disobedience by God's people over time, and God raises up a series of prophets to rescue his people and to warn them of impending discipline. We read about the conquer of the northern kingdom of Israel and then the southern kingdom of Judah, and then their exile into a foreign land, and eventually their
Mm-hmm.
return to the Holy Land. So these accounts reveal a great deal about humanity's sinfulness. They also reveal a lot about God and his character, and certainly about his faithfulness and also his justice. And throughout the Old Testament, there are a series of prophecies made about a coming Messiah who will save God's people. There
Mm-hmm.
are prophecies regarding the Messiah's ancestors, where he was from, what he would do, even when he would come in the book of Daniel. Uh, so when the Old Testament ends, when the Jewish scriptures end, the Jews are still expecting the Messiah. This is where Jesus and Christianity come in, of course. So by what he did and by what he said, Jesus claimed to be the long-awaited Messiah. By what he did and said, he claimed to be deity. He taught and healed people throughout the Holy Land, and he predicted his death and resurrection. So
Yeah.
those who believe Jesus' claims and believe that Jesus was the Christ, the Anointed One, the Messiah, that he was deity, that he was sinless, that he was crucified on our behalf to reconcile us to God, that he rose from the dead on the third day as evidence of his claims. Those people who believe these things are Christians. Islam also claims to be rooted in Judaism and in Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
but there is not this kind of overall coherence to the story that we see with Christianity.
Yeah.
So I'd also like to talk about the origins of Islam.
Okay.
Islam, again, claims to be rooted in Judaism and also in Christianity. Muhammad claimed to be the final and greatest prophet of Judaism and Christianity. Muhammad was born in 570 AD, according to the Islamic sacred sources, in Mecca, which is in present day Saudi Arabia. When Muhammad was born, Christians were not expecting a prophet, uh, but Jews who had rejected Jesus were still awaiting the Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
So when he was about 40 years old, Muhammad was praying in a cave where he apparently went to pray regularly, and he was visited by a spiritual being. Uh, and they had this encounter, this conversation, and Muhammad left trembling, with his the Islamic sources say his neck muscles were twitching. He was terrified, and he believed that he was demon possessed, that he had encountered a demon, and now he was likely possessed by a demon. He went home trembling, shaking, scared, hid under the covers, asked his wife to hide him, and his wife, Khadija, and her uncle convinced Muhammad that he couldn't have possibly been visited by a demon because he was a good guy. And so his wife's uncle convinced him he was actually the expected prophet that Christians and Jews were looking for, and
Hmm.
that Muhammad must have been visited by an angel, not by a demon.
Hmm. Yeah.
Muhammad, of course, was there and knew better than these people who were not there that there's no way that this had been an encounter with an angel. It was a terrifying event. He had been thrown up against the wall of the cave multiple times and commanded to read
Hmm.
or recite, even though he didn't know how to read. He kept saying, "I don't know how to read," and there was no point at which this, angel, quote unquote, said, "Do not be afraid," or anything like we see in the previous encounters with angels from the scriptures of Judaism or Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
So Muhammad was not convinced that he was a prophet or that he had encountered an angel. So he actually climbed a mountain multiple times with the intention of ending his own life, throwing himself off the mountain. But when he climbed the mountain, this spiritual being showed up again and said, "No, I am an angel. I am the angel Gabriel, and you are a
Mm-hmm.
prophet." This happened many times, and eventually Muhammad at some point embraced his role as prophet. So he received revelations regularly from Gabriel, which Muhammad shared with the people of Mecca as he preached that he was a prophet of Christianity and Judaism, just following
Mm-hmm.
in that line, in that faith tradition. But Muhammad's message was rejected by the people of Mecca. In 622, so it was about 12 years after his initial encounter with this spiritual being, and after just a decade or a little more of preaching in Mecca and being rejected, he fled to Medina, which is about 90 miles away. And at that time, he had about 40 followers, mostly close friends and some family members. And this actually marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar. The Islamic calendar starts in what we would call 622 AD or CE. In Medina, Muhammad began raiding caravans, sending out his men to raid caravans and gain resources, gain followers by force, kidnap people, end people's lives. He attacked unarmed towns and gained land and control and submitted followers in that way. And eventually, Muhammad had a big enough army and enough resources to invade and conquer Mecca, although he took it quite easily. Um, and then after that, he took most of Arabia, so, or at least a good portion of it before he died. He spent the last 10 years of his life fighting battles in the name of Allah and teaching
Mm-hmm.
his followers to do the same. So I think this is a really important uh, story of the origins of both Christianity and of Islam that are valuable for people to know, just kind of when and where they and how they kind of got started.
Yeah. One of the things that strikes me about the two faiths is that Islam, and help me to clarify if I'm correct in thinking about this, is that Islam began as a private revelation to some individual in a cave,
Right.
whereas Christianity, and for that matter, Judaism, it seems to be enmeshed in the historical narrative of
Right.
both Judaism and Christianity. Jesus moved around and talked, and people heard him on, sharing his teachings, and his crucifixion was very public, and
Right.
so it seems to me like there's a distinction between this public. I think it's the Apostle Paul. He says, we didn't do these things off in a corner somewhere.
Mm.
Quite the contrary. In Islam, is that we have a guy who goes off to a cave somewhere, has some sort of experience, and then this whole religion gets spun out from that, rather than having this historical framework that
Mhm.
we have with Judaism and Christianity. Am I correct in understanding that?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, Muhammad's followers and many of his initial hearers would ask for public signs,
Mm-hmm.
uh, for public miracles, um, for ways to see and know that these revelations were really from God. And of course, as you recall, Jesus performed public miracles
Mm-hmm.
quite often. And Muhammad's response was that Muhammad's miracle was the Quran. The Quran is the miracle
Mm.
that Allah has given to
Yeah.
Muhammad.
Okay. Okay.
And so the Quran says that Muhammad did not perform any miracles, um, that the Quran is the miracle, although hadith collections that came hundreds of years later say that Muhammad did all kinds of miracles, but the Quran actually denies that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. 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 This whole thing about subjective revelation to one individual in a
right,
cave
right,
versus, like, even in the Gospel of John, that John writes, he says, many other things, many other signs did Jesus do in the presence of his apostles,
right,
and that but these are written so that you may believe. And so
right,
there was this whole document, or this, yeah, I guess this whole documentation of Jesus's ministry, this whole evidence of Jesus's ministry, that the people of that generation could verify. So,
right, exactly, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, and the more you dig into Islam, the more you realize that the history of it is quite sketchy and unlike the common narrative. And uh, and they're and so yeah, they're and they so they it kind of makes sense to me that the initial I guess Muslims would need to kind of latch onto something that came before it, because
Hmm.
it's not it, there is no real uh, history like Judaism, or a coming Messiah, an awaited Messiah, that sort of thing. Although Muhammad says that he was the long awaited, last and greatest prophet
Hmm.
of Christianity. But
Yeah.
as we know, Christians were not awaiting a prophet,
No.
another prophet. All we were awaiting or expecting from our scriptures was false prophets. And I do believe, of course, that Muhammad fits that profile
Yeah.
perfectly.